let's call the meeting to order. Are there agenda amendments? Anyone? No? Okay, we'll move right along. Correspondence, public comments, items for future agenda items. We do have Act 46 and all that on the agenda. So, but if there's other correspondence or items that people want to talk about here, public concerns, we good? We're going to wait?
Well, I've brought some documents that you should be aware of.
Ah, okay.
If you want to talk about them now, I can, but maybe during the Act 46 discussion.
It might, okay. Does that make the most sense?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, then let's start off. I'd like a motion to, what's that?
Oh, nothing. I was just looking for Julia. I knew she was here.
Yeah, it's Christie, I guess.
A motion to accept the, approve the minutes of the August 15th meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you. Bob made the motion. Any second?
I would second that.
Okay, Dennis
And I did
seconded.
have one comment on them.
Okay.
I noticed that the heading of the minutes, that it was noted that it was in Franklin, and it actually was at FU.
Yes.
I
thank
caught that
you.
and I didn't change it,
Yeah.
yep.
Thank you for remembering that.
And that's all I noticed though, so if that's the worst thing you did,
Works for me.
10 pages. Yeah, that was good. Okay, so.
I noticed that there was a, if you count all of the board members, including the chairperson, there's 11. All of the motions were 11-0. So it should reflect that it was 10-0.
You can include the chair, and I've always done that. That's been, the past practice. I mean, I can nod if you want me not to do that going forward, but I've always done that.
Well,
think it's only
lately,
three, right?
when on the MVU board, we've been making the changes as necessary, because typically the board chair does not vote unless
Yep.
there's a tie.
Oh. Oh, I didn't know that. I do in Swan.
That's,
so.
yeah.
and you can. I think we're on that size board where it could go either way. We're not
Okay.
small, but we're not large, so.
Well, whatever y'all want, I'm happy to.
Yeah, me too. Whatever you would like, I'm glad to change it.
so,
Well, it's been consistent.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
We've always let the board chair vote.
What's that?
We've always let the board chair.
And on the elementary boards, I suspect they probably have to.
Oh, we have to, that's
Small.
true, whereas here we don't have to, unless we're lacking a quorum. Is it, can you do it if you're lacking a quorum, or is it only if there's a tie?
MVU's practice is that the chair votes only if there's a tie, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
What about quorum?
We can't start a meeting, the board chair is considered part of the quorum, yes, but as far as voting, we don't need
Oh,
a
okay,
quorum.
Gotcha.
We don't need to have, as our board is 9, we don't need to have 5 votes to pass
Gotcha.
something.
I'm fine with not having to vote. Easier for me.
It's not as much fun.
Unless it's really important, then I can be like the vice president, right?
It's not as much fun.
No, that's true. Okay, so all in favor of approving, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so the motion passes, the minutes are accepted, and,
Well, usually Becky would be here. She has a family emergency,
Oh.
so she's not able to be here. So she did share that information. If there are any questions, I would ask folks to get her those questions.
okay. She did share, she sent out yesterday the financials and told us, so we're
And
okay.
she would be the one who would best be able to answer those questions, so.
Everybody's okay with that? We'll probably, I'm sure we have questions, but we'll just do it there. Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, thank you. Emergencies come up.
Thank you.
Okay, superintendent's report.
So I have a newsletter, and I've started having the different central office folks contribute to that. If they're here in person, I'll have them share that piece, and then I'll do a little update of the folks that aren't here, and then things that I've put in here. Things that I'd like to highlight. Well, today is the regional Vermont School Board Association meeting. Tanya Hayes is there today because she wanted to hear what they say about the special ed finance law, to see what school board members are told versus what maybe special ed directors will be told, so it'll be interesting to see what the message is. But I would like to let people know that October 18th and 19th is the Vermont School Board Association Annual Conference and Meeting, and I highly recommend that. If any board member would like to attend, please let Pierrette know, and she'll make those arrangements. It's 2 days. I'll be going, and I think it's usually one of the better conferences.
Do they have a agenda for that or anything?
They do. I put a link and then I realized that this is a PDF, so that's not all that helpful. But I would go to the Vermont School Board Association. They have who the speakers are and things like
What
that.
they do, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Caroline Hill and Paul Reville are keynote presenters. So, see. Quick technology update. A lot has been going on with technology. The website has been down. I hope you got that email I sent about that. I didn't want any of you to be wondering what's going on. We had some technical issues that then we wanted to make a switch to a new platform so that it would be easier to update and be more user-friendly. And it had to happen a little quicker than we wanted. But we made sure that things that had to be up were up as quickly as possible. Apparently, everything that should be there is there now. It's just not pretty yet. We'll get to pretty later. And it was an act of Congress to get the links for the Channel 15 videos. And we had to remind people there that we needed them, and then they kind of forgot. So we had to do some following up, but they are there. They should be on the school. They're certainly on the Franklin Northwest website. You can link to each school district, except Franklin chose not to do it, but all the other schools did. They also didn't know that Highgate had voted to do it, so there was a little confusion there, but we should be good with that, and it's an important way to get our message out to the community, so I wanted to make sure that's there. And on the positive side, Robert's been doing a lot of work around Power School and Unified Classroom. I'd like to have him come and do a more positive technology happening in our schools kind of presentation in the future. But if there are any questions, he's very responsive, so he'd be happy to answer anything.
Is your picture posted? Because the other day, Wynn's picture was still on that.
Well, I
Oh,
know
no.
that his picture is somewhere with the video for MVU's budget vote. But I'm not sure. I know that's something that we still, it went down on my list of priorities because it wasn't up at all.
Okay.
But
the links are there, because I looked, I think 3 days ago, they weren't there.
they should be now.
Or at
I
least
looked
I didn't see
Yeah, I
today.
think he told us just yesterday, I think, that he just got the link, so.
We no longer had a person who was able to do the web development, so this was just work that Robert's been doing at night, and our Swanton tech person has been doing that as well. So we have some Franklin Northwest, and the old MVU budget video from last year is still up there. I'm sure we'll be able to take that down as it's no longer current, but the links are there.
Probably fun to watch, though.
Right.
So, again, student services, there was a lot of work that's been happening. There's a new math program training that happened. They are working on special ed coaching with Heidi Moser had sort of a change in her position, so she'd be doing more direct mentoring with special educators. There has been a new program or a transition of programming at MVU from a couple of programs that were in existence before have really been changed in nature and is being called Connect rather than the NOVA and the Ladders program. And so Tammy's been doing a lot of work there and working with leadership there around proficiency graduation requirements and how that can work for kids who really need an alternative educational experience. So that has been ongoing work. And I would really like to leave it there for me and have, of course, sorry, this Swanton first day of school was a big event and very successful. It was a pleasure to be there with the community. It really was a very special morning, and it was great to see community leaders from 25 years ago come and celebrate the school they helped build, and it was just a lovely morning. I would like to have maybe Kosha give some highlights of her update.
So there's a lot of stuff that's been going on as far as curriculum and training. We've had a lot of math training going on. Teachers at Swanton, Highgate, Sheldon have been doing math menu training, which is basically differentiating math instruction for their students. So a lot of math stuff going on. With the social emotional curriculum, almost every school has taken on something to do with dealing with student behavior and helping children who have different needs. So at Highgate, they had restorative practices. At MBU, they've chosen the collaborative problem-solving approach, and they're going to continue this coaching model with Jordan Spikes from Think Kids. He was our keynote speaker this year, and he is going to be coaching through video conferencing on a regular basis with the coaches at MBU, and they're going to learn the whole collaborative problem-solving approach. So that's really exciting. In Swanton, they're continuing to work with Joel Van Lant on trauma-based, intervention with students who have those kind of needs. So they're all, and then Sheldon, Swanton, and MVU Middle School, they did training on developmental design, which is like responsive classroom for middle school. So we've had a lot of training going on as far as social emotional development. The other exciting news is we have a new music curriculum. A group of 5 music teachers from our district got together, and their leader was Jen McConnell, and she used all her research from her master's program, and they've developed a brand new music curriculum which is aligned to the National Core Music Standards. So it's very exciting because they've got units that are set up, and then they've got proficiency scales to match that. And it's formatted very similar to our literacy and math curriculum. So that's really exciting to see. And as far as social studies, we just started working on the social studies curriculum. We are doing a K-12 alignment. So it was very exciting. We had 2 half-days in August where we had teachers from elementary, middle, and high school sitting together and looking at like what do we want kids to be able to do at the end of 12th grade, and then where do we start and how do we align our curriculum. So that's been going on. And then the only other update that Julie wanted me to do was this year we are in a 3-year cycle for the integrated field review, and the Agency of Education conducts that. So what they want to do is they want schools and districts to be evaluated or assessed, not just on actual SBAC scores, but to look at the qualitative. How are we implementing those educational quality standards? So we have a team of 12 people, including 2 central office people, so it's going to be Julie and myself. And then there are 2 principals. There's elementary teachers, high school teachers, middle school teachers, special educators, specials teachers, and interventionists. So we have a group of 12 people on our team. They will be going for a 1-day training to Maple Run. And basically what the integrated field review is that this group of people get trained to become peer reviewers. So schools with the northern part of Vermont will be visiting each other and really looking. So you're going to get trained in how to do those observations. And there will be a site visit to Franklin Northwest District on October 25th. where we'll have people from other schools coming and doing observations. They might be interviewing school board members, parents, students, paraeducators, teachers, and then we would get a report from the Agency of Education with what they call commendations, what you're doing really well, and then some recommendations. So that all is in the process. I have to submit artifacts that demonstrate how we are implementing these educational quality standards, and that will be submitted by Monday, September 10th. So they will be able to look at those artifacts, and then they supplement the artifacts with actual interviews. So that's the update.
Can I ask a question about that? So they do interviews, they don't do observation?
They do observations and interviews.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
And what day is that going to be again?
October 25th.
Thank you.
We don't know yet where we will be deployed.
Yeah, deployed.
Yes, because we will all be split up into groups with other districts, and, you know, maybe two of us will go to Milton, and there'll be people from Georgia and from other, you know, we'll all be together, so that it won't be just Franklin Northwest.
That makes sense.
Is looking at Maple Run and determining, it's a mixture.
That's good.
And so we don't know yet when we'll be going to other places. So I really appreciate Koshin's leadership on this. It will be a lot of work, and she's been doing a great job keeping us abreast of it. So
It's nice to get an update too from you on the curriculum.
And Andrea is here, and I'd like for her to give a little update as well.
First day of preschool.
So she's been busy.
Yeah, so I can say preschool is up and running. We have the sessions that are, some of the towns have broken out into 4-year-old sessions, and there's a couple towns that had such high enrollment that we have over 3-year-old play groups to accommodate for the high enrollment. I don't know if there's anything more specific than that at this point, but we're rolling, and I will also submit a more detailed kind of report with numbers and stuff like that for you all.
And we'll, of course, have an early childhood presentation at a future Franklin Northwest meeting.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Andrea? So I'd have a question if you don't
sure.
mind. So when you said you had unexpected numbers,
Yeah.
was it chaotic with unexpected numbers or stuff that you guys had thought might happen?
No, well, I think that what happened was Swanton, we had over enrollment in Swanton, which I had updated you on last spring. So we had, that's why we broke out and made, we separated the 4 turning 5s and had them enrolled in the preschool classrooms. And then the 3-year-olds are in play school, so it's not the 10 hours of minimum, but it's getting them to the school for a Thursday morning or a Friday morning. And those are fully enrolled with 15 kids in each one of those sessions. And Sheldon also accommodated for their over-enrollment by offering a Thursday play group also for increase. So that's how we accommodated for it.
You were planning this, I remember, like
Yeah,
last year.
that was
thank
kind
you.
of what our plan B was, and that's what we went with.
Thanks.
Yep.
It's good you had Plan B.
Always need a plan B.
Okay, anything else?
Not for me.
Okay, so we'll move on to thank you for that, everyone. We'll move on to old business, Act 46 information, and we have quite a bit of time devoted to Act 46, and I know there's a lot that needs to be done. We've got different updates from different people. We've got some documents. We've got the public. Jay has some information, so I'm not really quite sure how we want to start this. Do you want to keep it?
Do you want to start with the?
Well, I could. We had a Franklin board meeting last week, and one of the things we talked about is wanting to write a letter to the state board of education. One of our options, in our list of things that we can do, one of the options is, continues to be advocating to the state board to accept our alternate governance study. And we talked about maybe having the board write a letter, and I would draft something for the board to look at, to say, because one of the things that we heard coming out of the August meeting is the possibility of them saying, well, we have some questions or recommendations about your AGS. You could consider, could we ask them if they would consider giving us feedback that we could then address? So that we could not do a whole new study, but make some changes if they had particular concerns. So while we're doing that, and Perrette said, well, why don't we just do one for the whole district, which I thought was a great idea. So I drafted something. It may be that individual schools want to do one as well that may be differentiated, but it certainly occurred to me that you submitted a single AGS. It's a sign of unity. So I just literally today put it together and wanted you to have a chance to look at it. And if the board is interested, have a clean copy and board chairs could sign it. It's essentially just stating what I said. You are, as you're aware, we submitted testimony and at the state board meeting in July. We would love to have an opportunity. There were certainly questions and concerns that were clear. We'd be happy to respond to those in some way, if that would help them. Would you consider allowing us to do that? And I gave some suggestions, such as they kept bringing up being in the same room. I'm sure this group would be happy to talk about carousel meetings and how we could function a little. I know that they haven't necessarily gone, I keep looking at you, Bob, you're smiling. But I know that they haven't necessarily gone well. I know they didn't go all that well in Franklin Central. But there's no reason why we couldn't work at it to create a method where some decisions would be made in a carousel meeting, the information would be shared, and maybe people would then break off and make separate decisions or votes if they need to be. But there are ways that the group could work together through that.
I think our first crack at the carousel meetings, we were too ambitious. I think
Yeah.
we tried to book in too many presentations and speakers and ended up taking up the entire group time. There was no time left over for the individual boards
Yeah.
to meet or to collaborate amongst themselves. So that might be something to consider if we do look to go that route, to simplify the carousel meetings and keep the heavy content at the individual meetings.
Can I get a copy of the draft?
Yes,
Yeah, we should probably take the time for everyone to look at it, right? since we-
I passed it out ahead of time so that people could,
Yeah.
sorry, Julia.
No, good, thank you.
Did everybody else get one? Did you want to see one?
I'll
Jay?
take one if you guys quit.
I'm done with mine.
You bet.
I thought it looked great. I'll be quiet.
Is November 1st when the state's going to let us know? Is that the deadline for their?
The deadline is the 30th. They have stated that they would like to do it later in October. There's suspicion that it might be at their 17th board meeting, but we don't have confirmation about when that actual date is.
The 30th of what?
November
Okay.
is the
By law,
deadline.
yeah, it has
By
to be
law,
Oh,
right.
okay.
On or before.
The hope is that it's earlier, but.
I think it's a well-written letter that clearly states that we're open to conversation and to certainly, work on meeting somewhere with a plan that works for everybody.
I thought it was well-crafted, too.
One suggestion, I guess, in the second paragraph where it says we would like to create a policy that would allow limited choice within the constraints of Vermont statute. I'm wondering if we could say something like, we believe there is an opportunity to create. So it sounds a little more concrete, not just we hope there is a way, but
We would like to. We
think there's a way.
We believe we can create a policy that would.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can come by tomorrow and sign it.
Say that again, Deb. Sorry.
What did I say? We
Instead of we would like to.
We believe there is an opportunity to,
Okay.
or there are opportunities to.
Sounding more definite.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to say that we were going to create a policy without asking.
Right.
I had some assumptions based on your AGS. Sure, absolutely.
And I guess the last part about Alberg and Sheldon is interesting, and maybe that's the Sheldon update up there.
Mhm.
If there's more information on that.
Well, I do. It's not anything definite. I think, Julia, do you want me to jump in now, or?
Yeah, maybe
That
we
would
could
help
combine
you.
the two, give some
Mhm.
context and.
Well, as many of you know, the Sheldon board chair and another board member met with, and their superintendent, met with Julia and Terry and I a month ago. They are requesting of the agency of ed and the state board to be removed from their supervisory union, and they would like to potentially merge with Sheldon, and their idea is it could create a side-by-side or something. Who knows? At our last meeting, I was charged to see if that was serious or not, and whether the agency of ed, what would their timeline be? The state board will not be reviewing, as far as I understand, the removal or changes of any SU boundaries until they settle Act 46. And at the time, they weren't sure whether Alberg had been notified of that yet. So they may still be invited to go speak in September. I don't know if they're on the agenda for this month. But they will likely wait and see where everything falls and then address that. So that, again, I'm not entirely sure. I think they're going to be looking at the viability of the Grand Isle Supervisory Union with and without Alberg as part of that decision-making. However, that is something that if we hear from the state board that they're willing to give us recommendations or talk about options for Sheldon, and Sheldon has talked about the need to really get a sense from their community about the level of support for them merger to begin with. But it is something that if they were giving us an opportunity to revise the AGS, that's something that could be included. That's as much as I have. I know that Mike Savage from Alberg did reach out just again. But they also have, their community did vote to stay and be part of the Grand Isle Supervisory Union in a 3-by-1, right? 3-by-1.
So I think Alberg is looking to be a little bit more aggressive
Yeah.
than maybe we initially thought to be. I think Alberg would like to see a Sheldon-Alberg merger prior to the state board giving their recommendation, which
Logistically, I
I
don't.
think is a very aggressive timeline. And I don't know that, so this is something that we'll be discussing at our board meeting next week, because that's not even a consideration that we had made. Our approach was more of, if the state was intending on merging Swanton, Highgate, and Franklin, that, I mean, if that's what they were gonna do, regardless of anything RSU said, that an option would be to have Albert
We've named it.
Albert and Sheldon merged as a side-by-side within that
Right.
district. So I hadn't really considered an Albert-Sheldon merger outside of that, as sort of like a Sheldon-Albert merger, and then having the 3 other schools remain as is. I hadn't considered that.
Right.
Um,
And there's no guarantee, if the state board said, sure, Sheldon and Albert could become a district, doesn't mean that they wouldn't assign you to a different SU. So
Yeah.
if there's, you know, they could say, now you're part of Grand Isle.
Right.
Or,
Yeah. Right.
or now Albert's part of, so it's, there are a lot of unknowns there. And I think that Sheldon, and stop me if I'm overspeaking, I think that Sheldon wants to really examine whether the pros and cons. Because even just preliminary looks, it didn't necessarily mean that it was fiscally a good thing for Sheldon.
Yeah, I think we're having a really hard time fiscally determining what the best path is, because of how much taxes are going to change after Act 46 is
Right.
settled. There's not a way to determine what is our tax rate going to look like if we say, if they accept our AGR. I mean,
Right.
we can.
That's probably the easiest to determine.
Right, like we can make our best guesses, but when taxes change after Act 46, it's sort of unclear, and that's a hard position to be in, because it makes it difficult for us to make a solid recommendation to our community about what the best path tax-wise is. And I don't know that that would necessarily be in concert with what is the best path forward globally in general for Sheldon. So.
Shay, did you have something to, according to?
Well, it's interesting that this possibility comes up, because, first of all, State Board of Education knows very well that the decision to relocate Sheldon to the Franklin Northeast is in violation of their own metrics for small school support grants and geographic isolation. They established those metrics as being 15 miles door to door, or unless 5% of your students live beyond 15 miles, you're considered geographically isolated. So by their own admission, the decision to place you in the Franklin Northeast is not going to meet the requirements of Act 46, because it would geographically isolate you. So I don't, for the life of me, understand how Donna Russo Savage thinks that she can make that work. Now, when you talk about side-by-side with Albert and Sheldon, the question would be, well, what kind of side-by-side would that be? Would it be 3 of the remaining school districts in Franklin Northwest, or would it be a 2x2x1? From my perspective, that's an interesting possibility, because if it were a 2x2x1, Franklin has already voted to become an existing district because of geographic isolation documentation that exists, which, by the way, was not mentioned in the AGS report whatsoever. So if you're looking at a 2x2x1, I would expect that Alberg and Sheldon are pretty much the same size as far as proportionality is concerned, so you'll have representation that will more likely be equal. And I'm guessing that might be a little closer with Swanton and Highgate. I don't know whether or not Highgate would go along with it, but that'll be remaining the same. But in any case, it seems like that would be a possibility that would come closest to giving everybody what they're looking for, possibly. So like Julie says, I doubt very seriously, since Albert's electorate's already voted to merge with Grand Isle, I doubt that it'd be a hard sell for the state to change that.
That's what
Depends on how much pressure we put
Right.
on them here to show that this is not a viable option for us. The other thing is, if you're looking at the statements that Donna Russo Savage is making in terms of the hybrid model, the hybrid model, she bases that on the theory of Barnes versus Mount Anthony. And it's the case law that came about because of that. They actually specifically state in their documentation from the state board. Well, I've got Barnes versus Mount Anthony here, and I'm just going to quickly read to you what they ordered. It's not long. So it was so ordered in the Barnes versus Mount Anthony case, the total number of directors elected by voters at large shall be 11. It will be constituted as follows: 4 union school districts from Bennington, 2 union school districts from Shaftesbury, 2 union district representatives from Pownell, and 2 from North Bennington, and 1 from Woodford. That was the order that was given by Barnes and versus Mount Anthony. So as you can see, they are complying with proportionality based on a vote by the electorate on an at-large basis. Now, it's also important to note that the legislature, on the other hand, responded to this with a bill, H 167. And basically what it says, and then what at 167, that the federal court, Vermont Federal District Court, in its Barnes versus Board of Directors Mount Anthony Union High School, it has found that, notwithstanding the fact that the voters of a union district have the authority to approve a budget and to authorize various transactions such as the purchase or lease of land and the borrowing of money, the broad power conferred to school district directors, union school districts by the Vermont General Assembly is sufficiently governmental in nature to require the application of proportional representation or one person, one vote principle in the election of union school district officers. And so they also put in here a penalty for those that don't subscribe to proportionality by imposing weighted voting on those districts that don't comply with proportional representation on their boards. So there's no possible way that the new metrics will maintain equal representation legally.
Can I back you up for a second? When did that case happen?
1997.
Okay, 1997. Before Act 46 or any of this kind of stuff was
Well,
in place?
Act 46 has been an ongoing process for quite a few years now.
But yes.
But,
I'm just trying to figure out what we take away from. I don't have the legalese understanding. I don't know if someone else in here.
well, the
has
only
it.
reason why I bring this up is because I suspect that if Sheldon pursues something with Albert is because they'll more than likely end up proportional representation, which will probably not affect them because either school will probably about the same size, so the likelihood of a decision being made to vacate one of the schools or the other probably pretty slim. And so I don't think that in that scenario that Sheldon would have a whole lot to worry about. The rest of us, on the other hand, that's a different story.
I see. The proportionality.
Yeah.
You know, can I just thank you for that, but can I go back to the letter for a minute? Because I was thinking perhaps we need to add something a little more about Sheldon staying in our supervisory union. You know, maybe that needs to be a little more explicit in here is the only thing I can think of that might need to be saying more. And that gives us more of those options if we go with a 2-by-2, 1, or however it works out. But it seems to me there ought to be something here about, I don't know how, Julie, you took this.
I would be happy to.
Okay.
Maybe
Put that
just
in.
adding something before the sentence, we believe that there are other options.
Mhm.
Just maybe adding a Sheldon sentence there.
Or maybe add something about the changing supervisory unions would be so detrimental to the children in terms of curriculum, in terms of teaching. I don't know how you, but I mean, something has, I mean, that seems pretty drastic.
Is there a large difference in debt between the partner that the state is proposing to put you with and Sheldon, do you know? That could be a very solid
there what?
argument too, a large difference in debt. So if you're-
I don't have hard numbers. I know what I know, that Berkshire just did their whole bond vote. Montgomery School is fairly new, but I don't have hard numbers, no.
But the likelihood with that recent bond vote, that they have significant debt, that
Yeah.
you would be then shouldering as taxpayers in Sheldon that wasn't of your voting or of your doing. I think it's a solid argument as well.
Yeah. Those, and, well, you've got three things. You've got what Bob just said. You've got the geographic isolation, and you've got the votes of the community,
Yeah, you're right, and the,
And curriculum.
you're right, debt,
and the curriculum. So, I mean,
curriculum, debt, and.
but two of those are solid, I mean, goes against statute.
It's good, so maybe.
I'm happy to add to the letter.
I mean, most of this letter is about accepting our proposed AGS with potential small modifications.
Right.
I'm wondering if putting in the Albert-Sheldon merger piece is too big of a modification to that, because
Right.
that's not really part of the AGS we're trying to
I
advocate
struggled
for in
with the same
letter.
thing, because my thought was not to re-argue our case, that perhaps we would do that from individual boards, because the geographic isolation would be particular school districts. But that it would be a sign of unity to be able to have a broader letter saying we would really like to have, your specific questions that we could respond to, so that, our hope is that you will accept our AGS.
Yeah.
And then I think perhaps we could work together in Sheldon next week and Highgate and different, to see what different boards want to do. Does that make sense? So perhaps take the Alberg Sheldon piece out, but make a statement about how it's important to us to find a path for Sheldon to remain in our supervisory unions.
Yeah.
Does that make more sense?
And then maybe Sheldon could address specifics,
Oh, good.
Can I just have a question about something you said, Jay? Was there a recent vote in Franklin about, that you mentioned something about
Existing district
existing
status.
district? Was that a
Was that
recent vote, or was that?
That was November. We did it in compliance with the requirements of Act 49, because there was a deadline that you had to be determined to be geographically isolated on before November 1st, 2017. So we deliberately had the vote at the same time that we voted in favor of presenting an AGS proposal. And so, as a result of that, it created, of course, another argument at the AOE, because Donna Russell Savage seems to think that she has the authority to create a new list and apply it retroactively to the March 7th, 2017 date, which there's no provision of law lets her do that. So basically, the only reason why we're at this point is because I asked her a year ago, if there was a forced merger in the Franklin Northwest, what would it be, a 2x2x1 or 3x1? And I was hoping she'd say 3x1. And so my next question would have been, well, what do you do if you have two districts in the same supervisory union that qualify for an exemption, either because of geographic isolation or structural isolation, like Sheldon? And I asked her, who gets the exemption? She says, I don't know. And so I think that's probably what led up to the decision of what they're doing to us now. And it would sort of be kind of confirmed because of a meeting that was organized by Justin Degree with our new Secretary French, and I think, Devin, you were at that meeting. Mr. French made it pretty, correct me if I'm wrong, but made it pretty clear that the Northwest Supervisory Union was one of the top priorities for merger right from the very beginning. And so that didn't go over very well. But there's a lot in play here. I'll tell you, the last couple months have been a fair. This is loaded with meeting after meeting. I mean, I'm not even on board, and I can't begin to tell you how many meetings we've been to. But we are building a coalition. And that coalition right now is actually causing Mr. Zuckerman to have ongoing meetings with this new Secretary of Education. He wants an explanation of the process of AGS proposals. Well, at the same time, this opponent, Mr. Turner, is meeting with the Scott administration, and I heard today that he gave Mr. Scott a copy of my infamous email. And so they're having quite a conversation there. And of course, Turner's in a dead heat with Zuckerman. So he's going to try to outdo Zuckerman, and Zuckerman's trying to keep him out of the State House. So, and I also want to announce, too, that we met with Christine Holquist last Thursday in Morrisville. And she's come out and said that she's opposed to any forced mergers, and she's opposed to any kind of action taken that's contrary to the vote of the electorate. So she's scheduled to come and meet with us on the 13th. Hasn't been confirmed yet, but we'll organize another meeting at the Abbey with her. She's really come out and made a strong statement about her position on Act 46, so that's what's kind of encouraging. So,
Wow.
and you know, this is a political field that anything could happen. You know, she ended up with 4,000 more votes than Scott did in the primaries. The NEA has endorsed her, and I don't think the gun rights people will vote for her, but they will probably stay at home.
So,
So who knows what's going to happen? But everybody's pulling their eye teeth out, I'll tell you right now.
but if we go to that meeting, we can't all go, right, because of the open meeting laws?
You can go, if there's a quorum, we'll warn it as a meeting of the boards.
I would want the board chairs to let us know
Yep.
that they want, and last time,
So if any of
You
you
know.
would choose to go, it's a simple matter of warning the meeting and you'll be covered.
Is it warned as a Franklin Northwest meeting or as an individual board meeting?
it would depend, because, you know, Jay's making arrangements for dignitaries to come up, and if Bob calls us up and says, boy, Devin and I are both wanting to go, then we would warn a Franklin board meeting. If Swanton wanted to go, but only 2 people went, it's no big deal.
Okay.
But if there's gonna be a quorum of any board,
Okay.
we wanna know about it, so the board chair can let us know, and then we'll make you take minutes.
Thank you. We'll take minutes. When is that
It'll be
meeting?
the last meeting we'll be having, because so far we've got
He says
quite a
nothing
list
confirmed
of
yet.
legislators that are saying the same thing, that if they'd have known there was not an off-ramp
Right.
for schools that could prove they could meet the goals of Act 46, they would have never voted for it. The original vote was only 12 votes, and shy of 12 votes to a tie. So, I mean, we've got Victoria Strong, we've got Heidi Schulman from Stowe, we've got Cynthia Browning, and a whole bunch of them that are.
So there's a lot.
So some have voted for it, some have voted against it, but they're all coming up with the same statement that if we know that it was going to work out like this, we would have voted for it.
Interesting. So, should we, I know we want to stay with Act 46, but should we get approval of motion for this, or do we need to do anything with this, with the changes as discussed?
If you want to make a motion as discussed, and then I can amend, send it out to various board chairs and get it signed, or I could just have Terry sign it, or however you want to do it.
I'm going to leave it up to you all.
I'd like to see us all sign it, just to show that unity.
Good idea.
How
Can we have a
soon-
motion?
How soon will we all be meeting our individual boards? We meet in 2 weeks.
Right, next week we have 2, and the week after we have some.
Is that too late?
We could come by the
Soon.
supervisory union and
Well, I'm
office
just
and
wondering
sign.
if we all had some input.
It's September 18th.
This is the
But we have
19th.
everybody here.
MVU's the 20th.
I'm looking at ours. I can't remember.
19th.
19th of September? Thank you.
Yeah, that's the 3-board meeting, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds like a.
Is that soon enough?
I don't want to put it off too long, that's why
Yeah,
I'm
that's
asking
what
that
I'm
question.
I mean, I can come by the office and sign it.
I think the sooner we get it out
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
ahead of those board meetings, just in case they do come back and say, these
Right.
are our changes. That way we
Right.
can
Yeah.
really dig into this.
Yeah.
So why don't I reach out to individual board chairs about the best way to do it? I can hop in the car and go out to the farm and.
Well, my concern is that there aren't too many others here from MVU, so if I was to agree to sign, then I don't really have any input from my board. I don't mind signing it as an SU member.
Right.
But,
And that was my intent, is that this would be an SU
right,
Oh,
response.
so, I mean, it's a little different for, like Franklin's got their whole board here, so that's
Right.
very commendable, by the way. But,
so you can talk to Julie about talking to
Right.
your board
Right.
first. Okay.
That's my only concern about that.
That makes sense. Jay had a
Just one-
question.
Another thing, I wanted to let you guys know that I went to the second meeting held on August 15th at there, and it was standing room only, and it didn't go well for the agency of education. As a result of the meeting, at the mid-morning break, the secretary, I should say, the State Board of Education chair, Krista Gilling, actually informed the people that were in attendance that they were exceeding the capacity of the room, and that she delicately, or not so delicately, depending on your opinion, she asked for those people that are not associated with presenters to please step out of the room, which is a violation of open meeting laws. And so a notice has been sent to the State Board of Education notifying them that they violated the open meeting laws at the meeting. And so that's pending. And,
Ironic.
they got themselves into some really deep trouble.
Well, let's get to, thank you, but the task at hand too, or do we have a motion to accept this letter as written?
As
And
amended.
As amended? And signed first after consultation with.
I will make that motion.
Thank
I'll
you,
second
Dennis.
the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Okay, the motion passed. Great.
Thank you. I know that took a little bit of time, but I
That
just
was awesome.
thought it would be helpful.
It was really helpful. I'm so glad you had that as a basis for us to do. So, moving on here, we've got the Sheldon update, updates from other districts.
Well, there has been, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Margaret McLean and the group that she has, that's part of the statewide coalition that Jay alluded to. There is a class action lawsuit that is being prepared and ready to be filed as soon as possible after the state issues their plan, if there is any forced mergers required. I don't know if you received that letter by email. It was sent to board chairs. I don't know.
I forget what I saw.
I got a list of the people that was sent to, the 20. I've got a copy here if anybody wants it, accompanied with the leader of our team, Margaret McLean. I would highly recommend that you guys make a copy of both documents so that each one of you have a copy.
Did it come via email?
Came via email.
Our team has been working with a group of about 6 attorneys, and they have actually filed a rather in-depth preliminary suit notice. The class action suit first starts off by securing all the records pertaining to the Act 46 process at this point in time. And I've got a copy here, it's pretty well self-explanatory. But I recommend you all. Now, the thing is there's no cost for any of those that want to sign up as a plaintiff. At this time, that went out to 20 people. I have the list of the people that it went out to. It's anticipated that at this time, if all 20 of those
I'm so sorry.
become a plaintiff, then the estimated cost of proceeding with this court action will be between $3,000 and $5,000 per district. So, and I volunteered to offer the first 1,000 for Franklin.
So in line with that, my question, because they're urging individual boards to take a vote whether or not they want to be a part of the class action lawsuit, and to have that information to Margaret no later than, I think it was September 27th, she was asking for that.
Yeah.
My question is, since we are the entity that filed the AGS proposal as a single unified entity, should we be taking the vote at this level whether or not to sign on to that, or should that be at the individual town?
Well, I just got to look at it today, and one of the questions I have is really just that, because in the letter from Margaret, it's asking, for our school attorneys to contact them so that everybody could be on the same page. If, let's just say Franklin wanted to sign on and Highgate didn't, or some scenario, then that, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's my
So-
question, because the AGS was submitted
As a whole.
group proposal, and
Makes
this
sense.
is to oppose forced merger
Mhm.
instead of the AGS at least.
Right.
So my thought is, if we're looking to appear unified, then do we sign on to that as a supervisory union, or do we take the vote at the individual board levels in each community and proceed that way?
I think that's a very good point.
I think it is too.
It's also interesting to note that the suit starts out with an injunction placed on proceeding with anything on Act 46 until the case is resolved.
Now, if we did sign on as a supervisory union, would that count like 4 times the $3,000 to $5,000, or how does that work?
I would plan on anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 per district.
So I think the towns will need to also. I mean, I'm just, despite potentially one town not wanting to and the others do, I'm just thinking about whether or not the supervisory union would have the legal standing as a plaintiff, because nothing's been done to the supervisory union. It's the individual town districts
That are being
that have been
merged.
merged.
Well, the supervisory union would cease to exist and it would become a unified district.
Right.
So something has been done to the supervisory union as
I
well.
suppose. But I don't know. Maybe we should cover all the bases, I guess, is.
Would this be a good question for legal counsel?
I would think
Exactly,
so.
that was gonna be my next point,
Yeah.
that I think before any board makes a decision to sign on to a litigation, that they should ask some questions. Even though this is something that I know strategically that districts were interested in pursuing, particularly if there's an injunction. One of the things I do want to share is that we have a timeline, and one of the questions I did ask today is, where would we be, once the state board makes its decision, if the decision is that they want to follow the secretary's proposal, a timeline just starts kicking in, and we're obliged to follow that timeline. And yet, what if we're doing this other thing? What if we're, and an injunction would be an important part to delaying that. But we'd want to make sure that we were sure of, all of those things. We would not want our schools to be in trouble in any way, but I think an injunction is something that districts would be looking forward to, given all of the lobbying that's happening to hopefully sway the legislature into doing something in
Buy its time.
I don't want to, yeah.
Can I remark on that? And I would say, because Swanton, being the biggest here, I truly believe Swanton is committed to supporting their dance partners here, so supporting and being part of the whole supervisory union. And I also think, though, that stopping things would really help us, because it'd be hard to vote to go ahead with the lawsuit when it means that there could be really big problems in the school, if that makes sense. Am I making any sense? The injunction would help.
Yes.
Because otherwise we'd be like floundering, and our taxpayers might say, why did you do this? You're floundering. I may not be articulating that right, but what I'm trying to say is, there's chaos. Our taxpayers might say, why did you sign up for this chaos?
And I would hope,
point,
given
good
the time sensitivity of this issue, that this case would be heard quickly, because we would want resolution.
Resolution or revolution?
Re-
I couldn't quite hear what you said.
No, but I mean, we would
One might be
want,
dependent on the other.
we would want this not to be like, I don't know, maybe we do want it to be, take forever to get heard, I don't know which is better. But,
I don't-
it's, this isn't just some esoteric kind of frivolous piece. There's a time sensitivity to the implementation of the act. And, yes.
That's kind of where I was going. So it kind of goes to the next piece, which is the draft articles update. Would that be something people want to do or not want to do? Is it like,
Well, I wasn't gonna go through the draft articles, I think that's too much for any meeting like that right now.
Okay.
What I wanted to make folks aware of is that as those were released was also the timeline, which is essentially when the state board makes its, let's pretend it's November 30th. Within 30 days, the superintendent has to warn a public organizational meeting of the new organization. Within 60 days, that has to occur, and the Secretary of Education comes and swears in new temporary board members. Those temporary board members would be the board chair and clerk from each of the boards, not the SU board, but MVU and the local boards. And then that group would be the one who would get a budget put together and put together a warning for town meeting for actual board members. And of course, if you want to then do an Act 49 amendment to the draft articles, if you want to take that path, that has to happen within 90 days of the state board decision. It might actually be easier to let them exist and then vote on them as a whole and make a change later. But those are things that we would need some advice around. But I just wanted to make people aware that if we don't have an injunction, no matter, we would, the clock begins ticking, and we are legally obliged to follow that path, even if we're fighting in different ways. We would still need to follow that path unless there's an injunction.
Gotcha. That's what I was wondering.
Talking about a recipe for chaos.
Yeah,
Well-
that's what I'm concerned about. So
I
do
think
we
the
need to?
injunction is the first
Yeah.
piece
So-
of it.
Yeah. So do we need to plan for any of this, or do we just wait and let it be under drop-dead deadlines?
I think, I don't know that, one thing that we would want to discuss at a future meeting is, and we'd know more because we'd know whether we'd sign on to lawsuits and we'd have advice around, there'd be consultation among the attorneys around injunctions and what they look like, all of that. But I think the next piece, warning the organizational meeting, people have done it, it's just a straightforward, there are things you need to do. And typically you would hold your first transitional board meeting that same night. And elect a chair, et cetera. The bigger question would be whether, and we'd want to know really before then, whether we wanted to, how we wanted to address the articles. Whether we wanted to allow them to be imposed and then we would have, could we live with them and then make sure that we amend them in a way that increases protections or not? And have a committee actually spend time as opposed to rushing. But that's a discussion I think that needs to happen. More in depth.
Bearing in mind, those default articles are only good for 2 years.
Right, so you need to do something about it anyway, no matter what.
After 2 years, they could be amended.
So I see the question being, maybe we wait till October to discuss this. Do we want to do something ahead of time, provisional, worst case scenario, or do we want, at the same time as the rest of everything is going on? Or do we want to wait till we get the drop dead deadlines? Because and do it in the same time everything else is going on.
But I think the conversations at each of the local boards needs to happen this month if the communities are interested in signing on for litigation or to be part of that class action suit. I think that has to be determined this month. So that should be on everybody's agenda
Yep.
to discuss and arrive at a decision, which means that we should probably be obtaining legal opinion prior to any of the scheduled meetings.
And I would say, since this meeting is the first Wednesday of the month, that would be a good opportunity. We'd know what all the individual districts were doing. And it would give us an opportunity to then say, we may want a committee to look at draft articles and do some preparation work. Maybe at the October meeting.
Thank you.
Does that make sense to you?
Does
Doing
for
that?
me. Does it work for everybody else?
Well, that committee will have to be a 706B.
I'm sorry, what's that?
That committee will have to be a 706B.
Yes, it could, yes.
You'll have to.
It would have to be
form a
proportional.
706B study committee to do it.
Okay. So anything more on this Act 46 old business? Anybody else want to add anything?
Do we have copies of the email you were referring to? I didn't get that.
I think I've got
Yeah,
that.
I don't know that it went to board chair, it
I
did
think
go
I
to
got
some
it,
board chairs.
But it was weeks ago.
Didn't,
I
made a couple extra, I didn't see your name
Wasn't it
on
a while ago?
Wasn't that long ago.
No?
Dated September 3rd, 2018.
Oh, then maybe, I don't recall if I saw it or didn't
I
see
can tell
it.
if you got it here.
And all those-
My name's on there?
Policy.
Could that be forwarded to us? Could we?
If I have it, yeah. My name's
Bob's
on
here.
there.
I think only because I'm a member of that.
Harry Niles,
Google it.
Montgomery's here.
I think it went to Emily, not Julia. I think it
I got
went
an
to.
extra one.
Just for clarification, Bob, she does
That's my
have.
last.
Thank you. Does have a September
I made
28th
three.
date
Civic
notified
Clerk, that's my
one
last,
way or
yeah.
the other. But I don't see anybody else besides Harry Niles from Franklin County and Bob. I don't see anybody else here.
You don't see me on there either?
But you guys, please take a copy of this because I'll give you a copy of the actual class action
Thank you.
suit and the letter that Margaret sent out explaining everything.
Yeah, we have that.
Okay, I wondered if I was losing it.
So-
Okay, thank you.
So September 28th, they want to know if we want to join,
Yeah.
and then if,
Will be a sign on to the plaintiff.
right, and then if after the State Board of Education makes their decision, and if they go ahead with the forced mergers, and then they do file the lawsuit at that time, that's when we would be required to pay to be part of the class action suit. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. You'll be billed on, in other words, you're not going to fork over $3,000 the minute the class action suit goes into effect. You'll be billed by the folks that are actually providing the service. That would be the attorney, David Kelly. But it's estimated, like I said, that they estimate, depending on how many people sign up as plaintiffs, more, of course, that you get, the lesser it's going to cost.
Right, but when would we be looking at, we would have to provide funds at, what would be the earliest date, do you think? Or it's hard to say.
Well, they're going to file the suit immediately, or
Right.
as soon as possible, so I would expect that at least by the end of the year, you should be prepared to have money set aside.
Okay, all right.
They've been working gratis up to this point. We just
Right.
don't know how long they will continue
Right.
volunteering their time.
There's already been private donations to this effort, pretty significant donations. I'm not sure how much that it is, but I'm told that there have been some private donations made,
Okay.
which may also make the cost even cheaper.
Right.
And as it's hard to say because before the state issues its plan,
Right.
they really don't know how many communities are going to be involved in fighting this because some of them may get their AGS proposals
they're-
approved, at which point they won't be
Right.
fighting.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right.
There are 88 school districts that are facing forced mergers. So,
Wow,
and they'll all be invited sooner or later.
okay, great.
We
So-
mentioned the other thing that's happening in Franklin, so that the other boards know.
Yeah,
What's
that was
going
my
on?
next
Okay.
step.
Thank you.
Right.
As far as updates from other districts, we do have two petitions currently pending, or two petitioned articles pending that will be going to vote on October 2nd. And we will be having an informational meeting on September 25th to discuss those two articles. Actually, we have three articles, one that the school board added onto that. But the first two petitioned articles, one was to vote to become a non-operating district, effective, I think the date on the petition was July 1, 2020. For the purposes of then possibly pursuing an avenue of an independent school. The other is to sell the school district assets, the educational assets, to the town. Both of those will be having discussion and being voted upon on October 2nd. And from what we understand, those are binding at this point, not advisory in nature.
Well, that sounds kind of like a Albert thing. Once you go down that path, you don't go back. So what you all are saying is you won't be part of the supervisory union, regardless?
If the petition is approved, the article is approved, then they would vote to become a non-operating district effective July 1, 2020.
So you wouldn't be part of the
So at
supervisory?
that point, we would not be part of the supervisory union, and then they would be pursuing opening an independent school.
When is that vote?
That is October 2nd.
Because I would think that would make a huge difference to Swanton on whether we wanted to join up on that lawsuit. Because we wouldn't be unified at that point.
And I think the intent there is that if there is, I think the reason the date was put, and Jay, I mean, it was your petition, so correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but I think the reason for putting the date out into the future was to allow for the possibility of legislative action or legal action to pursue its course, and time to divert the course and come back to our AGS if it is approved or allowed to stand.
But you won't be able to if you take that vote.
You can always rescind that vote if it's before the effective date.
I could answer any questions you had on
What's that?
that. I'd be glad to answer any questions on those two articles.
Yeah, how can you rescind it?
Well, the article is crafted to take effect 2020. In fact, it's more likely going to be amended on the floor in 2021. So, just to back up first, the first article is to sell the assets to the town. We know that Act 46, Act 49 requires that the school districts, when they're merged, to sell all of their assets for $1 to the new consolidated school district. When we're looking at it, frankly, from a risk assessment, strictly from a risk assessment point of view, when we know that the hybrid method of representation is not going to stand the test of law, then we fully expect that there will be a board that comprises of 4 people from Swan, 2 from Highgate, 1 from Franklin. There's just no legal way to avoid that. And so the idea of us selling our school assets to a board that's comprised mainly of people that are not even members of our town is not acceptable. And so what we are proposing, because the law requires the school district being the owner of the school assets to surrender those assets, they can't surrender what they don't own. So the theory is, in the first article, to transfer ownership of those assets to the town rather than the school district continuing to have those ownerships. Now, there's been a lot of talk about what are the consequences of that, and to be quite honest with you, you have to think of it as moving your assets from this pocket to this pocket and nothing more. Because all of the issues about maintaining your building and all of that there's no reason at all why that should change. So who is responsible for that? Your town, all your town does is, as I said, move your assets from one location to another, so it's inaccessible from a merger requirement. So all of the things for maintaining the school, there's no need to make it more complicated than it is. All those can be maintained the same as they are right now in a lease agreement that would be coming forth from the town rather than the school district. So,
Jay, I don't think it sounds as simple as just the town owning the asset. It sounds to me that y'all have a different vision going on.
We have a legal opinion on this, okay? So the idea for the selling the assets is to protect our assets.
Right, but you get to do that according to Act 46. If there's any idea of closing a school, which hopefully wouldn't happen, then you get to buy it for $1 anyway.
No, that's not true.
I thought that was
That is
true. That's
one
what
of
our
the-
lawyer told us.
That is one of the options that's given to the consolidated school district. They're under no obligation to follow that path. They may offer the return to district to $1. But they could use, for example, a very easy example is that the consolidated school board could simply say, well, we're going to use the Franklin School now for the superintendent's office. So you get to use it. Not only that, but a town can't accept one of the terms of transferring back the property is requires a town to use it for at least 5 years for a public service requirement. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
There's no, I mean, return it to the town from which it came is one option. There are others.
Well, okay, so I, probably not the forum, sorry, everybody, to go into that. It's just, it seemed to me, what I caught on more than selling it to the town was the idea of becoming your own district.
That's a petition, and we were required to warn. There's a lot of conversation around that from both sides.
That's, I think, bigger. For
That
us
is-
than the
that is
other.
bigger, that is a bigger, and I will admit it, it's a bold approach. But I also want to add that if, and that's a big if the town decides to pursue independent status, they'll have 2 to 3 years to do it, depending whether they amend it. Okay?
Well, that's okay, and we're just,
But
that has more
Just one more
ramifications.
point I want to make perfectly clear. An independent school is still allowed to create agreements with the supervisory union for services such as special education and those kinds of things too. So I don't think it would be correct to say that the cord is cut completely.
That's interesting. Okay, so where are we now? That was a big bomb.
Yeah, it was a big bomb for us, too.
It's too bad that doesn't come before the commitment date of September 28th, because that's going to be hard, having that come after.
I don't see the connection because
Well, maybe you and I could talk about it at a different time.
the decision you guys have to make.
Okay. So, anything else before we move on to the next agenda item?
We don't have a contract. We thought that we might for this meeting, but it turns
Okay.
out that we do not.
Okay. Thank you, though. Okay, future meeting dates, we already talked about that one. Oh, it's at Swanton.
It is.
Okay. And anything else that we wanted to talk about? Anybody else?
Just that future meeting, we should have a curriculum presentation for October.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank
So we
you.
talked about it.
Okay, we're committing you to that. Okay, so that ought to be an interesting meeting. Anything else, anybody?
One last thing. The school district of Hardwood actually hired Paul Gillis as their attorney to represent them. And he's looping in with the attorneys that wrote this. So,
So they're joining the class action suit? Harwood?
Hardwood will be joining and they will be pooling their legal resources. Hardwood having already hired Paul Gillis as their attorney.
It's going to go both routes? They're going to go single as well as?
No, they'll address I should back up, that they'll address their primary issues about representation of them moving forward in any kind of Act 46 consideration, but Paul will also be teaming up with the attorneys that wrote this lawsuit.
Great. Okay, thank you. So do we need a motion to adjourn?
I'd make that motion.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Any second?
This doesn't seem right.
I know you guys want to just keep going, this doesn't seem right. I know there's so much loose out there to be saying.
Oh, you wouldn't believe what's going on.
Well, but,
You just wouldn't believe it.
I know. Anybody second?
I'll second his
You're
motion.
seconding, okay. And that's it, that's
As
done,
long as
right?
it
We don't
is.
have to do any discussion or anything, okay, so we are adjourned, everybody, at,
Aye,
oh, we do have to
We
vote?
can vote.
Okay, so anybody want to, all signify aye who are ready to adjourn.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we're adjourned at
I know.
7:52, I think, or 7:53.
Well, the estimate was right on, just want to say.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Even though we moved things into Act 46, we
Yeah.